Do you remember the exact moment when you discovered your passion in life? Do you remember who you were with, where you were, and what it was that unlocked all those wonderful and new emotions inside of you? Or perhaps you're lucky and you've known from a very young age what you wanted out of life. If that's the case, I envy you. For some, half their life flies by before they find out what they're passionate about, and I'm one of those people. In my case, it took half my life and a disaster before I truly realized what it is I am passionate about. Comics. All my life I've adored comics. But it wasn't until recently when I lost the vast majority of my collection to a basement flood that I realized just how much I loved them. It felt as if part of me was washed away in that flood. Take that as you will, but it certainly was not a pleasant feeling. Needless to say, I was crushed when I heard the news. The flood, the destruction of my collection, the rebuilding process, all of this has shown me just how much my passion for manga and graphic novels have grown over the years. Just how much those inked pages have become an inseparable part of my life. To quote myself from earlier, do you remember the exact moment when you discovered your passion in life? Yes. Yes, I do. It all started with a little series called Welcome to the NHK. I was 13 years old. At this point in my life, I knew what anime was. Back in those days, they showed the good stuff on Adult Swim. Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, FLCL, Big O, and Outlaw Star, to name a few. I remember vividly having to mute the TV every time Adult Swim came back from a commercial break. You see, back then they had a spoken warning for parents stating that the upcoming shows were not exactly kid-friendly. The voice was this strange robot-sounding guy. It was very recognizable, and my parents always had an ear open for it. But, being the little shit that I was, I always found a way to get around my parents in their somewhat overbearing ways. Fast forward a few years, and at this point in my life, I was now a proud teenage otaku. And if that sounds cringeworthy to you, that's because it is. And I considered myself a pro. I had already cut my teeth on the more adult side of anime. I couldn't be bothered with the stuff I considered kid shows at the time. All of that was far, far beneath me. Wow, I really was a little shit back then. Around this time is when I started to lose my interest in anime, actually. You see, this was all before Crunchyroll and before Netflix. So it was somewhat hard for me to constantly find new and exciting anime that could satisfy my tastes. To teenager me, this was all very depressing. It was around this time that I discovered the wonderful world of manga. I remember the exact moment. I was browsing the shelves at my local comic book shop. You know the kind of shop. The kind that has so much stuff that it feels like it will all collapse on you at any moment in an avalanche of nerd paraphernalia. My favorite kind of place. Keep in mind, at this point, I didn't really have too much of an interest in comics. The only reason I was even at this shop was because I liked looking at all the neat things that were crammed in there, even though I didn't really know what any of those things were. I remember walking past all the magazine stands packed to the bursting with the latest issues of whatever it was that people were reading at the time. That is when I came across a smaller shelf, tucked in the corner of all by itself in a section of the store hardly anyone wandered to. On this shelf were some strange looking books. In my mind, these had to be some sort of novels. They were thicker than most comic books I've seen, but much smaller as well. What was even stranger about all of that is the fact that they opened up backwards. What sorcery is this? I remember thinking to myself as I held up a volume, a very perplexed and uncomfortable look on my face. Someone must have seen the faces I was making because I distinctly remember them saying, "Those are manga. Japanese comics. You know, like that anime stuff." Manga? Japanese comics? Anime stuff? To my young brain, this was all very confusing. You mean to tell me they adapt the anime I watch on TV into these strange looking comics? It wasn't until later that I learned that normally it was the other way around. But at the time, this was some astonishing news. Could this be what I was looking for? Anime was getting stale to me after all. Could this be the new thing that rekindles my love for the medium? I held the volume in my hand, squinting at the cover. Welcome to the NHK Volume 1. What the hell is that? Shrugging, I walked up to the front counter, paid the man, and took the book home with me. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. Welcome to the NHK Volume 1 would introduce me to the world of manga, and from that point on, I would never look back. I devoured the first volume, figuratively speaking, of course. As soon as I completed it, I was back at the comic book shop buying Volume 2 through 8, the entire series. The man behind the counter was even kind enough to inform me that the manga was based off a light novel. What the hell is a light novel? It didn't matter. I wanted everything NHK related. I didn't just love Welcome to the NHK, I obsessed over it. It was a rather unhealthy obsession, and I'll be the first to admit that. But I found part of myself in the main character. At the time, I was rather introverted. I still am, but not nearly as much as I used to be. I was nowhere near as bad as Sato, but still, I could relate to the character. This was the real turning point for me. I read the NHK volumes over and over. I read the light novel over and over. I wanted more manga. It was around this time that I learned that most anime were based off of their manga versions. This was excellent. That meant, for the most part, I could go revisit all the anime I loved watching while growing up in their original manga format. It was amazing. I soon realized not all anime is based on manga, and sometimes the manga comes after the anime. And in those cases, it is best to avoid them. But still, this was a whole new world to me. Soon enough, my interest in anime started to fade, and I found myself drawn, pun intended, to manga. I started to watch less and less anime and started to read more and more manga. Eventually, I wasn't even watching anything at all. Instead, I was spending what money I could scratch together on that delicious paper crack. Welcome to the NHK will always hold a special place in my heart. Forever. Not only because I could relate to the characters and their struggles, which I'm sure many of you can, but because it was my gateway. If it were not for this series, this work of art, I might not have discovered the wonderful world that is manga, and I would never have developed this passion. My life is certainly better because of manga, and it's all thanks to this series. That is why I was so devastated by that flood. Sure, a lot of my other books were destroyed in the process, but none as dear to me as my NHK volumes. Those volumes had been there from the beginning, and I thought they would have been there till the end. Sadly, that was not the case. It's not all gloom and doom, though. Luckily, this story has a happy ending. Most of the books I lost were replaceable without much difficulty. Volumes 1 through 7 of Welcome to the NHK were easy enough to replace. They were pretty cheap online. But for some reason that I cannot fathom, Volume 8 demands outrageous prices online. As of the date that I'm recording this, a used copy in good condition runs for $191. That's a little bit too much for me. Thankfully, with the help of a dear friend, I was able to find a replacement Volume 8 that didn't bankrupt me. I was able to snag it for retail price, probably a little bit less too. I am incredibly thankful for this. And believe me when I say I won't be letting these volumes out of my sight anytime soon. Many of you who are listening to this follow me on Twitter. So you were there when I announced the crushing news about my collection. You were there through my rants and raves about losing my NHK volumes, and many of you could understand where I was coming from, and appreciate that. But I felt as though I needed to make more of a backstory. I needed to let you all know why Welcome to the NHK is as dear to me as it is. And I really needed a way to express why I was so upset over all this. Those were not simply books in my collection. They were the volumes that started all of this. And I now hope that you understand where I'm coming from just a little bit more and how absolutely thrilled I am to have them all replaced. A life without inked pages would be a strange one for sure, and it's all thanks to Welcome to the NHK.